Good morning, welcome to Breakfast with Rachel Burden and Charlie State.
Our headlines today. The row over COVID vaccines and the Irish border. The European Union says it will control the movement of jabs between the Republic and Northern Ireland, but then backtracks hours later.
The Prime Minister publishes an open letter to parents saying he's in awe of the way they're coping with homeschooling.
Confusion over coronavirus rules in maternity wards. Midwives warn a lack of clarity means some staff are being abused.
Good morning. Spectators will be returning to top-flight tennis, but only down under for the time being. The organisers of next month's Australian Open confirm they will be letting in 30,000 fans a day.
Hey, Mr. Ancelotti, how are you?
Hi Mark, how are you?
And how football clubs are increasing their efforts to connect with vulnerable supporters during the latest lockdown.
Good morning. There's a big mixture of weather on the way today, with heavy rain moving northwards across England, probably turning to snow for some in Wales and the West Midlands. Scotland and Northern Ireland having a day of sunshine and showers. It is going to be a very busy morning here at the BBC Weather Centre. Join me for a full forecast a little bit later on.
Good morning. It's Saturday, the 30th of January. Our top story this morning, then, amid a growing row over the supply of COVID-19 vaccines to the EU, officials will today give more details on the restrictions they will put in place.
It comes after Brussels first warned it would impose controls on the movement of vaccines over the Irish border and then backtracked just hours later.
Late last night, the authorities warned the measures, which were set out in the Brexit agreement, could still be imposed if necessary. Our Ireland correspondent Chris Page has the story.
The Irish border was probably the most serious obstacle on the road to Brexit. The UK and the EU believed keeping it open was vital for the peace process in Northern Ireland. The solution was to put in place some checks on goods arriving into Northern Ireland from the rest of the UK. That meant no controls on the frontier with the Irish Republic. Yesterday, Brussels said it would trigger an emergency clause in that agreement, known as Article 16. It allows parts of the deal to be overridden in exceptional circumstances. EU states are getting powers to block COVID vaccines from being exported. The European Commission believed Northern Ireland could be used as a backdoor to bring doses into Britain. All parties in Northern Ireland strongly criticised the Commission. Boris Johnson and the Irish Prime Minister Micheál Martin made their strong concerns known. The EU announced it wouldn't use the emergency clause after all, but unionists weren't impressed.
What the EU did in, first of all, wanting to implement Article 16 and override parts of the protocol was to demonstrate that its whole approach to Northern Ireland has been based on a hypocrisy and a falsehood for the last number of years.
A big diplomatic crisis has been avoided, but the events may have implications for sensitive political relationships in Belfast, London and Brussels. Chris Page, BBC News, Belfast.
Well, the Prime Minister has published an open letter to parents saying he's in awe of how they're coping.
He also promises hundreds of millions of pounds will be spent on a national education catch-up programme after the pandemic. Here's our education editor, Bronwyn Jeffries.
It's tough for millions of parents right now, trying to help children learn at home. Schools in England are mainly closed until March. Today, Boris Johnson said he couldn't thank parents enough. He said they're buying time for vaccination, and that's saving lives. Only a few children are still learning in school. Parents and teachers are worried about lost learning. There is a promise in the letter of hundreds of millions of pounds for catch-up, but it's going to be a big job.
One of the schools I have responsibility for, fantastic place, serves a very deprived community. Only 30% of those families have access to broadband in that area, only 30%. This is digital poverty in a really extreme way, and it means that many children, despite the very best efforts of schools and teachers, still cannot connect with that learning.
This warehouse is getting laptops to kids, more than 800,000 so far, but not every child will have somewhere quiet to work or parents able to give them lots of time, leading to fears that children could pay a heavy price in this pandemic. Bronwyn Jeffries, BBC News.
A team of scientists from the World Health Organization has spent a second day in the Chinese city of Wuhan, where COVID-19 was first discovered, to investigate the origins of the pandemic.
Our China correspondent Stephen McDonald joins us now from the city. Stephen, very good morning to you. There's a lot of fascination as to how this is working in practice for those investigators. Can you give us a sense of what they're doing literally in the hours they're there?
Yeah, well, this is their second full day out of quarantine. They can now have face-to-face meetings with people and do these so-called field trips. So they've come here to the Jinyin Tan Hospital. Now, the reason they've come here is that doctors here are infectious diseases specialists, and they dealt with some of the earliest cases here in Wuhan, some of the earliest transmissions of the coronavirus. Also, crucially, doctors here have written a paper for the prestigious medical journal, The Lancet, about the earliest case detected so far in Wuhan. This is somebody traced right back to the 1st of December. So, of course, you can understand why the scientists on this team might want to speak to the doctors here.
And what do we know about the access they have? and what restrictions are they working under?
Well, they've got a couple of problems. One is that apart from doing your sort of quarantine in China, for the next couple of weeks, you're still restricted in terms of how many people you can speak to, where you can go. So they can have these sort of meetings with special people, but they can't mix freely in the general public for another 2 weeks. And that's going to basically take up all their time here. So they're based in a hotel on the sort of outskirts of the city, a sprawling complex around a lake. People will come there and they'll have their meetings, and other than that, they get in buses and come to places like the hospital here. I imagine they just go through the corridors, have their meeting, back on the bus and then back to the hotel. The other problem they have, of course, is that their Chinese hosts are controlling everything in a way. So whatever they want to do has to be cleared by the Chinese authorities. Now, questions are being asked about whether or not all information is being passed on or if they can get all the access they need. But so far, the scientists have said they haven't had a problem, that the people they want to speak to, they can speak to. They're going to go, for example, in the coming days to the market where the first cases were traced back to, the seafood market, and even to the lab where there's been this theory that potentially the coronavirus might have escaped from there. Now, they're saying they still think that's a bit of a conspiracy theory, highly unlikely that it's come from the lab, but they've got to show that they've gone there at least, and so they will at some point be going to that Wuhan Institute where it potentially, well, some people would say, the coronavirus leaked from.
And lastly, Stephen, I mean, for you, going back to Wuhan, given that this is where it all began, what reflections do you have of that place now?
You wouldn't recognise it if people came here during the lockdown. Now the city of 11 million people is kind of back to normal, if I could put it to you that way. There are a lot of average movement around the streets, full of cars. The markets are full of people. They haven't had a single transmission here, according to official figures, for 7 months now. Now, everybody will remember that the lockdown here was very strict for 5 months. Not only in this city, but the whole province of Hubei, 60 million people basically had to stay at home. Well, it seems to have worked. It's crushed the coronavirus for the time being in this city. And right now, the focus in China is more on the north and in the northeast, where there have been these new outbreaks. But the Chinese officials do seem to have a way of controlling the coronavirus when it breaks out by these very localized lockdowns, a lot of contact tracing, and also mass testing. So this is the sort of Wuhan that these scientists have entered. It's a place where basically you wouldn't even know there'd been a lockdown now, other than that they'll be speaking to the people who were at the absolute coalface from day one.
Stephen, really interesting talking to you this morning. Thank you very much.
See the headlines as they happen and watch BBC News live in the app and get the full story with bbc.co.uk/news. Follow the story for all the latest with BBC News.